You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This special edition 1 episode is sponsored by Cisco, taking your business a level up. Let's get into it. Welcome back to B2B Tech Talk. My name is James Carbary with Sweetfish Media, and I'll be the guest host for this episode. We are recording on site in Denver, Colorado at the Ingram Micro ONE event. And in this episode, I'll be talking to Michael Richmond, the Director of Technology Services at PNN. Michael, how are you doing today?
Doing great, James. Thanks for having me here.
I'm really excited to chat with you today, Michael. So cyber attacks are happening probably way more than most of us think. Can you share maybe some recent attacks and talk about why they happened and how they could have been prevented?
So yeah, there's multiple different levels. So we tend to run into a lot of different things in our work. Specifically, governmental schools, law firms are being heavily targeted. The last probably 4 or 5 incident responses we've worked on have really focused on organizations that are really under the radar. Typically, so they're going to have high visibility from threat actors, but maybe lower budgets and kind of are stretched from a technology standpoint. So a couple that come to mind, actually we had one today. State of Louisiana was attacked. They had to shut down the systems for the state, email systems and some other public facing things.
Wow.
Did not pay the ransomware. They're steady working on that to return to systems to working state, but it's going to take 3 or 4 days. We've worked on others that, quite honestly, were 6-figure ransomware payouts that were negotiated down. And really, a lot of it came down to either misconfiguration or just really not having the visibility they need within the networks and the activity to be able to respond accordingly.
Wow. Whew. When it comes to updating your IT security, Michael, what pushback do you typically get from executives and how do you respond to that pushback?
I think, the biggest thing is always the price justification.
Yeah.
When you try to make that transition from, let's say, the IT staff or even the CISO, somebody that's responsible for security, to transition over to CFO, maybe somebody in finance or even CEO board level. A lot of pushback from a price standpoint because it's hard to justify that, right? It's not making money. That's the typical role of IT is operations. It keeps the lights on. It's available. Yep. So it's a little bit of different approach when you start talking about security. The thing you have to look at it is, what's the cost if you don't invest? And that's really how you transition the conversation. You have to back it up with things that are impactful personally to that business and really describe that whole process of what happens if something goes wrong for that business. And so you really bring it kind of home for them, and then you're able to build that story and that business case and use case. You don't necessarily have to do 100% of things that you envision from a security standpoint up front, but there's things you can do that, chip away at the list of items that you should be doing from a best practices standpoint.
That makes sense. So what are some of the most common mistakes that you see a lot of companies making when it comes to cybersecurity?
There's a lot of companies spend a lot of money for security solutions and those types of things. There's this false sense of security in kind of where we are today that these preventative measures, whether it's endpoint solutions, IDS, IPS, your firewalls, all the things that you're pouring into this, managed, if you've got somebody providing security operations center services, monitoring your networks and things like that, we're not to the point where that's sufficient anymore. So we need visibility into where these things are occurring on the network. You're transitioning from preventative controls to really detective. We need to see what's happening because right now, as you see all these in the news that they keep happening on a regular basis, you can't prevent 100% of the time. Yeah. So something's going to happen. It's having that response process already ironed down. Maybe you've got somebody on retainer already from a technical standpoint, having that conversation with them to really transition over from, okay, we're going to activate our cybersecurity policy and have to leverage that. And because they're not going to maybe maintain those high level security resources in-house. So, that retainer piece is something we're seeing on a regular basis. The other thing really honestly is misconfiguration and not being able to keep up with those types of checks because that's really the difference, right? So you think about all the security products that are out there, they're looking for the malicious activity. They're not looking for misconfiguration. So because that's still valid, right? That's not malicious. It's not going to trick up any sensor or software or anything like that. It's the misconfiguration piece that really is what eats everybody's lunch. And that's where these things happen.
Real quick, before we jump straight back into the episode today, we want to tell you about Ingram Micro Financial Solutions and how you can maximize your buying power and get to yes with your customers faster. For the last 9 years, Ingram Micro has been Channel Pro's reader's choice for best financing options. Put the power of our credit and leasing options to work for you. You can easily contact Financial Solutions at ingrammicro.com. All right, let's get back to the show.
What can companies do to address that misconfiguration piece?
So, we typically like to approach everything we do from the security consulting services that we do is risk-based. So we're going to align with some framework. There's a lot of different ones out there, but just addressing all of those issues within a really solid risk-based framework for cybersecurity. And that walks you through those things of, okay, here's the processes we need to have for authorized software, authorized hardware. How do we detect when it's outside of our approved configuration? Managing our golden image and our VDI infrastructure or whatever it may be. To make sure that what's on the network is approved, for one thing, and functioning the way it should be and configured the way it should be. So you get into having those types of processes and procedures that you maybe are not standard anymore. That's kind of the transition we've seen is people really don't focus on the misconfiguration and configuration management as much as kind of the detective pieces in there for malicious software.
Need to be.
Yeah, they need to. That's where a lot of these things happen.
So you mentioned earlier, Michael, about having a plan, almost going into it knowing, hey, something is going to happen.
Right, yeah.
What are we going to do when that does? When it does, and so we can mitigate the impact of that attack happening. How can a company create a better plan?
It really starts with a really solid understanding of your information footprint. That's really, you kind of take an inventory of those assets, because until you do that, you don't know really what your kind of risk exposure is. If you don't truly understand the data sets you've got in your organization, how important they are, who owns that data set. So you go through that point, because that's really what's important, right? Depending, with nuances for the organization and the type of services they're trying to achieve as a business. Understanding that really good, solid footprint. We know that. We've got blueprints for our data. We know who owns them. And then you can start to prioritize where you're spending your time and your money for those resources to protect that data sets. And where kind of, okay, if something did happen, where do we need additional backup, DR capabilities? It's all about risk for us. So you've maybe minimized all the risk you can, and you can tolerate a certain level so you can accept it. For those that you just can't get rid of, or you can't do anything to get rid of, you insure it and give it to a third party, right? So you can evaluate all those things and go through that process. It's very methodical. It keeps you from jumping around, helps you focus. And that's really starts with that kind of blueprint, risk assessment, driving down that road of, okay, here's our assets, here's how we need to protect them, here's maybe even regulatory or compliance issues that are going to push us one way or another that we're legally mandated to comply with. So that's kind of where you start.
Yeah.
And then just let that organically guide you. Like I said, there's plenty of good cybersecurity risk management frameworks out there. CIS, NIST, HITRUST, ISO, take your pick. There's several others. You put those together and kind of implement them as you need, because they're all very flexible and dynamic, and you can use what you need to for your organization. But until you understand kind of how you're built and have a really good understanding of that and a handle on that, what you're doing is just kind of throwing money at security just because you think you should be doing it that way.
What is the framework that you guys subscribe to at PNN?
We actually use multiple ones, right? So it's not a one size. They are one size fits all. You customize them down, right? But we're not tied into anyone, because no business is like another, right? So we need that flexibility. It works very well, and I recommend that to anybody. You're not tied into one. You can leverage the positive pieces out of one or the other, and it gives you what you need. As long as you have coverage, they typically have, on average, around 20 areas, 19 to 20. high-level domain areas. If you focus on those, that'll get you where you need to be.
I love it. So our last question for you, Michael, today, and it's a question we love asking, where do you see technology going in the next year?
Cool. A little bit of a loaded question, bring out my crystal ball, try to figure that out. If I knew that, probably would make a lot of money. But where we're seeing it, especially from our cybersecurity practice, specifically, we're starting to see more influence from privacy, obviously. There's a lot of that going on. I think that's going to be the next thing especially from a consulting standpoint, where you're getting this traction. California, Texas, others are, California's law is going to affect first of the year. It'll be enforced 6 months later, but it'll be retroactive. We've been working on GDPR for a while now. Yep. I think that's going to sweep. There seems to be a sea change with consumers and what they want done and what responsibility they expect for companies with that data. I think that's going to impact technology a lot and how we manage those things and the solutions that come out of that, especially from manufacturers and developers. That's going to, from my perspective, going to be very impactful in the next 12 months.
All right, Michael, how can our listeners stay connected with you?
Very easy. They can follow any of our content on pncpa.com on the web. I'm at LinkedIn / Michael Richmond is where to find me, is probably the easiest. And we always post current content and a lot of our links for our activity and resources on the website.
Wonderful. All right, if you're listening to this and you want to stay connected with us, make sure to follow us on Twitter at Ingram Tech Soul and join the discussion using the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Thank you so much for listening. And Michael, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. This special edition 1 episode is sponsored by Cisco. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production by Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today in your favorite podcast player.